following a very successful meeting in East Kilbride earlier on, where hundreds of PCS members are absolutely clearly indicating they'll be on strike on Wednesday. And what I wanted to talk about before I have to dash back to London really, is what's at stake in this dispute, where we go after November the 30th, and what we need to be doing now in the days and hours ahead of Wednesday. The first thing I think that we need to address is this. If you've been in Britain in the last 2 years, or even 3 years, you will not have escaped the notice of the newspapers, the politicians and the TV and radio programmes that have been pumping out a lie to us. That lie goes like this. The country is teetering on the verge of bankruptcy, we're about to become the new Greece, and if we don't make all of these cuts, the last person to leave the UK should turn out the lights. Now all of that is rubbish, but it's done for a very clear reason. If people are battered day in, day out with the belief that the country is teetering on the edge, then people are going to be harder to convince to strike to defend themselves. It's a very deliberate strategy. Add in that we're all supposed to be in it together, we've got to tighten our belts, and it's a recipe for people to try and stop us fighting back. It's therefore really important, I think, that we understand that in fighting to defend our pensions and our jobs and our services, that we understand quite clearly there is an alternative. There is an alternative, and we have to raise that alternative. And the alternative is this. It is to recognise in Britain, in every year between 1918 and 1961, our debts were twice as big as they are now, and yet we did not cut our way out of those debts. We built millions of council houses, schools, comprehensive education, and a national health service. Recognising that people being in work, paying tax and insurance, and making our society a better place was infinitely better than throwing people out of work onto the scrap heap where they claim welfare. So we have been in this situation before, and far worse, but we took very different choices. And the government must be forced now to make different choices. That means we should do something about the £120 billion in tax that rich people avoid paying and evade and avoid and is not collected every single year. But it also means someone, and it should be politicians, but it's fallen to the unions, raises the question, why aren't we challenging the fact that the financial markets are now picking governments, picking prime ministers, and deciding social policy? Last week the government said make any concessions because the markets wouldn't bear it. Well, I think we've got to say that people should rule their countries and their societies, not the markets. And we have to stand up and challenge the brazen sort of attitude of these people that allowed them in September to go on the BBC, a bond trader, and say, I lie awake at night dreaming of this crisis because I make so much money. And he went on to say that people have to understand governments didn't rule the world, Goldman Sachs ruled the world. And therefore this strike is about so much more than just the attack on our pensions. It is about millions of people saying, we're going to stop you robbing our pensions, but we understand that those who have the least are paying the biggest price, while those who cause the mess have their snouts in the trough and are laughing all the way to the bank. That's how important this period ahead is. And that's why I hope everyone here, I'm sure you do, understands that this is not just about our pensions. It's about the 600,000 jobs in the public sector that will be lost in the next 3 years. It is about the 700,000 jobs in the private sector that will be lost if these cuts take place. It is about further pay freezes that mean your income is frozen while inflation runs at 5.5%. And additionally it means that things you've taken for granted in your community for years, services will be lost. Choices made between home care services and leisure services, between teaching assistants and qualified teachers, between jobs in the job centre or jobs in the council. We have to say that if we lose this battle ahead, we will feel the effects of it for years and years and years to come. That is why, colleagues, this strike is one of the most important things as trade unionists we will ever do. That is why we, I think, have to recognise that having millions of people on strike on Wednesday sends the clearest message possible to the government, and they need to listen to that message and sit down and do something different. And that's why I really want to share with you what's happened in the last couple of weeks. Because, I think the government never thought we'd get to this. And I want to pay tribute to the members of PCS, the UCU in Scotland, and the NUT and the ATL in England and Wales. Because 500,000 public sector workers went on strike in June. And they went on strike when lots of people were sniping. And they said, it's too early, the talks haven't finished, why are you going on strike? I tell you what, it was the brave action of those men and women that everybody now agrees has transformed the entire situation in the UK. From 4 unions and 500,000 people to 31 unions and 2.5 million in the greatest show of coordinated solidarity that we will have seen in a long time. I don't think the government thought that would happen. Ballot result after ballot result came in, and suddenly they woke up and smelled the coffee. So what is their response? First of all, it is to make some meagre concessions at the 11th hour in order to convince people that maybe now they're okay. Their attempt to throw some crumbs to the people over 50 was a cynical device to try and split off people who are older from those who are younger. Our answer has to be twofold. First of all, we are unions for all the generations. We are unions for young people, middle-aged people, as well as older people. And we will not let them divide off those people nearer retirement than everybody else. But there is another message too, which is even if you are over 50, Cameron is lying to Parliament when he says your pensions don't change. Every person within 10 years of retirement will still pay loads more money in for their pension, and they will have a 20% devaluation because of the changes from RPI to CPI. The concessions they made are welcome, but the way I think we have to describe it is this. If you were mugged tonight in Glasgow and robbed of £10, and the mugger feels sorry for you tomorrow and gives you a quid back, it's good you got a quid back, but you've still been robbed £9. And that is the situation with your pension. It is mass robbery of billions, and they are attempting to give a tiny bit back. We have to say no, but it's good that you finally moved. You have to move an awful lot further. So when they made these concessions, they found that not a single union in Britain bit. All of them still united to reject it. So then came Plan B. We then had Francis Maud suggesting that the workers, or peasants as he probably thinks of us, can show their displeasure by having a 15-minute strike on him. We have to say, apart from giving away his attitude to life, it was a desperate attempt at the last minute to try and muddy the waters. It didn't work. So now we have the spectacle, like a scene out of Dad's Army, where ministers are running around shouting, "Don't panic," with troops being trained to be on the borders at Heathrow, with scare stories about schools being shut, and now Michael Gove making a speech today that Len McCluskey and I are militants who are leading their members out on strike because we want to bring the government down. These are the last refuges of scoundrels who now want to try and throw anything in to confuse the situation. We have to say this. The real militants are the millionaires of the cabinet who stand by with massive pension pots while we have nurses, civil servants, council workers and teachers being robbed of everything they were promised for generations. They are the militants, and we have to stand up to their robbery and say we are not letting you get away with it. That's why Wednesday takes on such a significance, because what we're going to see on Wednesday is a different type of society. We're going to see a society where people outside hospitals and schools, tax offices and job centres, outside airports and outside colleges, are all uniting to say this. We're proud of the work we do, we're proud to serve the people of Scotland and the UK, but we are not going to let you walk all over us and take things from us that every independent analyst accepts have nothing to do with pensions whatsoever. Our pensions are not unaffordable, they are costing less. The money you're being asked to pay goes straight to the Treasury. The RPI to CPI change is being done because it saves them money. You have to ask the question, why is CPI right for your pensions, but RPI is right for students to repay their debts? It is one rule for one and one rule for everybody else. So what we want on Wednesday is an absolute massive show of solidarity. We want people who haven't been on strike before to be on strike. We want people who in the past haven't gone to picket lines to be on the picket lines. We want the rallies in Glasgow and Birmingham and London and Cardiff to be bigger and more vibrant than they've ever been. And we want the government to get a message. And that message is when we wake up on December the 1st, Britain looks very different than when we went to bed on November the 29th. It looks different because millions of people have said no. Millions of people, supported by pensioners and students and private sector workers, saying we know what you're doing and we are standing behind the public sector. Recognising that if we are defeated, it makes it harder for everybody else to struggle. Whereas if we win, everybody benefits. And that is why I leave you with these two thoughts. The first one is this public-private divide. Very important point for me to make. The government is trying to convince people that public sector workers have it so good that these poor people in the private sector graft for 40 hours a week to allow you to live in a life of luxury. We have to say this. We want workers in the private sector to have better pensions. We're desperate for them to have better pensions. It's why PCS and Unite and the National Pensioners Convention have launched a campaign, Fair Pensions for All. Decent pensions in the public sector and the private sector, and let's not forget the state pension, which for most people is still the majority of their income in old age. We want to unite people, not divide them. And we need to tell people that the real scandal of pensions in this country is not public sector pensions, which by the way pay out on average £200 a year less than defined benefit pension schemes in the private sector. The scandal is that only 11% of people working in the private sector now have a defined benefit scheme, when it was 36% only 15 years ago. So the real story here is the greed of the shareholders and corporate executives who have shut down pension schemes and exploited private sector workers. And the answer we give is this. You don't improve private sector pensions by slashing hours in the public sector. You improve them by us winning this battle and giving everybody the confidence that we have got to stand together so that all working people can have dignity in retirement. Now my last point that I wanted to make is this. I think everybody accepts the 30th is going to be an incredible success. All of the unions united to say that we're not going to let them get away with it. We all know how much is at stake. We know if we lose on pensions, it's harder to defend jobs, it's harder to defend services, it's harder to break the pay freeze. We know that if we win, the confidence we will get will be inspiring for people to say, why should we always pay the price? So the stakes are massive. But my message on behalf of PCS in finishing is this. This strike is not an end to itself. This is not a protest that allows us to let off steam for 24 hours and then meekly dock our caps and go back to work and say, at least we tried. This is a strike to stop them doing what they're doing. And that means the clearest message we have to give is that when Maud goes into the TV studios and says the union leaders haven't got a stomach for it, they're going to have one day strike and give up, we have to say absolutely not. Which is why PCS has called on the TUC, and it's been agreed that every public sector union meets in London within 2 weeks of the strike in November, and we plan further action. And our view is this. Is when Maud realises he's wrong. The best way to avoid further action is tell them we're going to build on the success and do it and force them to get out of their chairs and around the table. We don't want to strike, but equally, even much more importantly, we don't want your pensions robbed for generations to come. So our message is, let's make Wednesday massive, let's give them a shock of their lives and hope that they back down, but if they don't, we will have to do it again and again until we win. That's what you can do.